It is what you think it is.
Hello?
I am a god.
I wasn't always this cracked. I used to be normal.
Well, as normal as any girl under the influence of
The most iconic costume item in Jennifer's body. I'll be knitting and crocheting the entire garment. So here's how I ended up ruining my life. First off, I needed to sample the hearts pattern. By establishing the size of the hearts, I would have a better idea of the rest of the knit. My first sample was, admittedly, sort of promising. The shape was good, but they were way too big. The second was less promising, but I felt that I was onto something, at least size-wise. The third made me realize how trash the second was, and the upside down ones looked like little houses. So no good. The fourth was better, but still too spiky. It was kind of fitting conceptually, but still. The fifth was a lot better because I used the duplicate stitch method instead, so at last, using the final yarns, I had cracked it. Speaking of the final yarns, in the end I went with a warm pastel pink and a deep cherry red. I also specifically chose mercerized cotton because its sheen reminded me of the velour fabric, and that was that. Now it was really time to get started. Yet again, this garment was to be knitted from the bottom to the top. However, the fold over hems I tend to go with just didn't feel appropriate given the weight and density of the cotton, so instead I went with the alternating cast on. This was the first time I'd ever used it, and it was a choice between this and the tubular cast on. As far as my sanity was concerned, the tubular cast on could crawl back to the dark hole from whence it came. The original sweater didn't have a fitted waist because it was made for literal children. Although garments are often fitted to the actor before filming, it's hard to tell with this one. And either way, this was one of the multiple aspects I was willing to take liberties with. So it would make sense to incorporate the stitch decreases into the ribbing to shape the waist as well as possible. Except, that would be
wrong.
Because decreases create angles in places where you may not want them. Not only that, but you may also find that after spending the best part of your day knitting, and the previous day only casting on, the waistband you end up with is far too long. Clearly, there was something incredibly wrong with the way I was measuring things.
So if I put these two ends together, this is how much longer the first attempt was compared to the second. And what I really need to do is basically make it somewhere around here. So that would be the ideal length.
And it didn't stop there. I then realised that weight was a factor in all of this. Not my own weight, but the cumulative weight of the yarn when knitted at length. This appeared to really affect the tension, so the sampling I did previously wasn't really relevant here anymore. I was starting again.
Okay, so like I said, with my second attempt, I'm going to frog it, and then I'm going to cast on more stitches, and start again. Although in some ways it's an uncomfortable feeling to have to undo your work, there's also something
quite cathartic
about it. It's as if nothing ever happened.
But as superstition would have it, 3 really is a magic number, and my third attempt was good enough. It seemed a little small, but I wasn't going to go through it all again, especially with the chance of it being looser off the needles. Well, I guess it would be nice if I could knit this body. I know not everybody has a body like this sweater. Well, things were pretty simple for this first part. I just carried on knitting with the decreases until the smallest part of the waist, then followed up with increases until what would be the start of the armholes. This is where things started to get a little confusing, and probably mostly because I had never done this before outside of the round, so I wasn't familiar with the sequence of what to do next. And as always, since I wasn't following a pattern and had little interest in googling a topic that would take up the entire search bar, I just dove right in with a type of unhinged and unsubstantiated confidence that Dunning-Kruger only ever dreamt of.
And I'm going to continue to go back and forth in a zigzag and cast off more and more stitches in a slope until I reach the maximum width of my sleeve.
At the time, it just made sense to start from one end and knit each panel as they came. This was fine, it was doable to an extent, but...
So I just started my redo of the front panel, and then it suddenly occurred to me that
by the time I got to my centre panel, I couldn't make the armhole cast-offs even on both sides, because you can't go back on cast-off stitches like that. Duh.
That makes so much more sense.
So if I was going to be pedantic, and I was, it would only be right to start with the centre back panel and leave the armhole shaping to the front panels instead. In terms of surface area, this looked like a pretty big blow to the schedule. But since there wasn't much else going on in terms of technique other than decreases left, right, and actually not in the center, it didn't take too long to catch up. Of course, all 3 panels required some neckline shaping, so that's what happened.
I can't even anymore. Anyway, let me show you what it is.
What is that?
At this point, I was convinced that it would be visible when worn. Don't get me wrong, bigger mistakes had already been made, but this was the knitter's equivalent of a bright yellow mustard stain on a crisp white shirt.
I just can't. Go away.
The shoulder seams ended up deserving their own segment in this monstrous process video. They had the soul-destroying powers of a post-sacrificial Jennifer, and I felt them drain every last ounce of life I had left in me. Why, you may ask? Well, again, I was using the Kitchener stitch, of course. The Joker to my Batman. The SpongeBob to my Squidward. Again, it was ultimately the Jennifer to my Needy. And to this day, it remains the absolute bane of my life. Let's not speak of it anymore. I decided to move on to the hood, seeing as it would also be attached to the main body. Nevertheless, the merry-go-round of horror forever ceases to end. So at 1:45, it finally dawned on me why my stitches weren't adding up symmetrically for the hood. A little while back, my armholes were, let's just say they were gaping like the hole one often finds oneself dug into by oneself.
What?
So I decided to remove an inch or so from each shoulder edge.
That was enough to make the armhole as small as I wanted it to be.
Except I only did this for one side.
Ah, okay. It's the next day and I'm going to attempt the Kitchener stitch. Hopefully for the last time, but we'll see.
I finally did it!
This time I should have the same number of stitches on this side.
I had my reservations for this attempt. In my goal for self-preservation, I didn't allow myself to expect things to go perfectly.
So you can already see the neckline and lapel shaping. All that's left to do is just to carry on knitting, and
Lo and behold, I have single-handedly proven that manifestation is real. This is me displaying an uncanny resemblance to Zoidberg having a midlife crisis. Scratch that. I am Zoidberg having a midlife crisis. Let's not mince words here. I had literally and figuratively fallen short of the perfect hood.
you can see that it's actually the perfect size for my mannequin, which doesn't have a hood. It looks like one of those morph suits. The girls that get it, get it. What I am happy about is that my prediction of how the shaping should go is working out so far. I didn't really do any research for this, so with all of that considered, it's not going too badly. In actuality, it's going to be a lot bigger than I expected.
To avoid further disappointment and rage, I excavated the depths of my wardrobe
I don't really own many hoodies.
and found a hoodie for reference.
Turns out I have more than I thought. Anyway, so basically I have to add about that much more to my previous rows. I mean, technically I could just carry on, but I don't think it would give the shaping that I want. So I think it's best to start over. I probably should have done this from the beginning, but I didn't really think about it.
I then spent the next 2 consecutive nights amending my original error in measurements. All that was left to do was to sew the top edge together to close up the hood, but I knew better than to attempt the Kitchener stitch after dark. With what I thought was the worst of it over and done with, I was ravenous, so I ventured out into the woods to find my next victim before sunset. The sleeves were relatively simple, and I only needed to frog a little a couple of times because somehow I thought that German short rows were sloped cast-offs. Like, on what planet? I think my subconscious muscle memory was trying to tell me something, but we'll soon find out what that's all about. So firstly, I set in the sleeves without casting off, meaning that I knit the live stitches into the armhole and then cast off with the usual knit cast-off method.
Job's a good un.
Well, not really, and here's why. For the next one, I switched the knit cast-off to a stretch cast-off instead, hoping that it would fix the problem.
We'll see if it works out.
Bear in mind, at this point, I was only really used to top-down sleeves and knitting from the armhole instead of knitting up from the cuff. To remedy this, I decided to do more research into sleeve setting. And let's just say, I knew how to set in a sleeve, but sometimes my brain just...
So here's the finished armhole. And although it's not crazy stretchy, you can probably still tell that there's quite a bit of stretch. And it's the same amount of stretch that the knitted seam has, basically. So it doesn't make it any tighter or looser. But if we compare it to the first one I did, there is barely any stretch. It's very stiff, and that's because of the knitted cast off I did, and you can see how tight that was. So it just locks into place.
And as my luck would have it, the one thing I should have done in this case was also the precise thing that I was trying to avoid in the first place, aka sewing in the sleeves after casting them off. But as the circumstances would have it, it didn't really make a difference at all. Although the stretch cast off gave the most, you guessed it, stretch, it left an annoying bevel on the outside, and so did the first attempt. However, sewing the sleeves would also mean zero stretch capability. So, to put it simply, there was no perfect solution to the current state of affairs. If it fit well, it didn't look good, and if it looked good, it didn't fit well.
So here's what the latest set-in looks like. It's a lot neater, but at the same time it has like zero stretch, like none at all. So aesthetically it is looking better, and this is the previous attempt. And it's got this weird like wavy line going on, and it just doesn't look as good, but it does stretch a lot, which is something that I really want, but I guess I don't have to have.
What I then had to come to terms with was that the issue lay in the fact that my sleeves were too small.
So yeah, I'll get back to you on that. In the meantime, I'll be looking at whether or not I want to do the pockets. A big part of me doesn't, but at the same time, I am trying to recreate an existing garment, so I should be loyal in a sense. I don't know, what do you think? I think it looks so nice without. I'm really worried that it's going to be really clunky or like chunky if I put these pockets in. I'll figure that one out. Although the setting in looks okay, I'm really bummed out about the German short rows. And since it's no longer necessary for me to actually have them, because I'm not setting in with live stitches, I'm just gonna undo all this and actually redo the sleeves. Basically, because the sleeve is too long anyway, I'm just gonna maybe take off about this much. And then to end the sleeve at the top, I'm going to make decreases instead of German short rows. And I'm just gonna do everything again. So, yeah. I don't think I'm gonna regret it. I think I will regret it if I carry on. Now is not the time. Now is not the time.
And if we're really going at it, I needed to put some serious shaping into the sleeve tops. At this point, I was nearing the end of the week, and I had basically spent the whole of it dealing with the sleeves, but c'est la vie. After decreasing the length and adding some actual armhole shaping to the sleeve, I started setting it into the empty armhole. But then I decided that my shaping was a bit too lazy.
On second thoughts, I'm going to round the top of the sleeve a little more.
So I cranked it up a little bit, and it was as perfect as it was going to get.
And you can probably see this one is a lot shorter. This is the new sleeve. This one is the old sleeve, and it's a little short, but it's almost a full length sleeve. You can still see where the German short rows were. Whereas this one, we have nothing. This side just looks worse on the stand. The hood is great. Well, it's a little small, but if I'm honest, I'm probably not going to be wearing it.
Naturally, I wanted some semblance of seamlessness for the pockets. Was I entirely confident in this approach? Absolutely not. Part of me was incredibly aware of how
Meshy.
it had the potential to be. So I cast on into the main knit using a crochet hook to create the stitches at the bottom.
Here's the pocket before I've sewn it in. And I'm going to sew in this edge as well. Once I've attached it to the top, I'm going to create the ribbing for the side.
Since I knit from the bottom up, the pocket wasn't receiving any special treatment compared to the rest of the sweater.
So I definitely want to redo some of the stitching, but this is essentially what it's going to look like. Obviously this part still needs to be sewn together, and so does this part at the top, but I'm pretty pleased with how it's gone in.
Things were pretty speedy, and I finished the second pocket the same evening. I could barely believe that the main knit was finally done, and it kind of wasn't still. At this point, it looked more like it came from the sewing pool scene / final boss level. It was disheveled and still ran the risk of unraveling in certain places.
Why?
Weaving in all the ends took close to 2 hours to complete, and I got thirsty. That sounds like a long time for such a boring task, and it was. but nothing, and I mean
Nothing.
could possibly have prepared me for what was to come. Sure, the swimming pool scene was over, but I was yet to stab a succubus in the heart with a utility knife.
I mean, I was yet to stitch all the hearts in with a darning needle.
And of course, this was the most important part. As curiosity would have it, I decided to time how long each heart took to stitch in. The first attempt took 14 minutes and 22 seconds, which came at no surprise because I made a mistake halfway through. The second and more flawless attempt took 8 minutes and 10 seconds. I was shooketh, to say the least. At this point, I had no idea how many hearts I would need to cover the sweater, but I knew there were going to be many. 8 minutes times a lot equals an eternity. At this rate, I was going to get 7 hearts finished per hour with 4 minutes of leeway, although I ended up speeding up the process for each heart.
So this took 2 hours. I really like the way it's turned out, but I'm also really aware of how long this is going to take me. But that's okay, because I really think it's going to be worth it.
After a long evening of counting stitches and getting used to duplicate stitching again, I had completed the first column, only to realize that my hood increases were off-center all along. The devastation was fierce, and it dawned on me how truly out of my depth I was. A drowning chip had nothing on this. Naturally, I considered undoing the hood, because the hearts took too damn long and were too damn cute. But I already redid the hood once before already.
I totally miscalculated the gap between the columns. A little gutted because I literally spent the whole morning doing this column, so it might actually just work out better for me to undo this. I don't know, but it's pretty obvious.
If I undo this entire column, what it will mean is that I can actually center it with the hood, and then it will make this gap smaller, but not as small as this one. I might have to undo all of this.
After all, there was plenty else that wasn't perfect in this project, and so help me, I wasn't going to spend another couple of days rectifying a perfectly good hood. So in the end, I redid the hearts and shifted them to match. In hindsight, this was the worst decision of my adult life. The friction caused by the duplicate stitching at such high speed resulted in copious amounts of dust everywhere, hence the reason I'm wearing a mask.
I am upset. There is no way I'm redoing the entire column all over again.
Eventually, I had graduated to the front of the sweater, and the pockets were my next adventure. In hindsight, I really should have made the hearts on each piece before attaching them all together. Alas, it was yet another lesson learned at University. In my defense, I just really wanted to see how everything would look together before I started the hearts, and although that could have still been achieved by embroidering first, this way I didn't have to map out the entire pattern to the exact stitch and row beforehand. And I also had more leeway when it came to the actual fit of the sweater, which for me was the most important aspect.
So every time I make a new stitch, I have to put my hand in through the pocket, which is already super tiny. And this is precisely what I was trying to avoid. It's times like these that I question my life choices a little more than usual. Nobody would even know.
Over the next couple of days, the slight shift in symmetry dominoed into what I can only describe as a Valentine's Day gone wrong. Little did I realize, but what I initially thought was a single stitch shift in the heart columns to match the hood ended up being at least 2.
So I don't know if you can tell, but basically this side the hearts come down a bit further away from the neckline. So on this side it's like a centimeter gap, and on this side it's more like a 2 centimeter gap. But at the same time, this side is going to overlap onto this side for the fastening, so it kind of evens out. I'm not really sure what happened there, but something clearly did.
Had I been sewing the project instead, I may have already cut new panels out of my fabric, and given all the time in the world, I probably would have undone the hood and started all over again. However, ironically, in accepting the irregularities of my work, I was objectively closer to the original, and was, in actuality, having my cake and eating it. Or rather, in Jennifer's world, I was killing it and sucking the bleeding life out of it. Yummy! Was I just licking my wounds at this point? Some of you may be screaming at your screens right now, telling me to go back and make it right, and some of you may be really over all of this perfectionism talk. Like, it's not that deep. Either way, I've said my piece, and the janky hearts are staying. On the outside, things looked great. On the inside, however, it was a different story. It was, pretty much, what I imagined the innards of a succubus demon look like. Due to my tunnel vision, I realized quite late in my progress that the gory weave-ins were going to be visible from the front.
My lapel is no longer blank, it actually has all of the understitching. The same goes for this side as well, though you can see that one side I have more of a gap here than on this side. And that's because of the pattern, but hopefully once I do the center hearts, it'll look a lot nicer.
This was just about short of a disaster. The whole point of being a succubus is for people to be oblivious to the very fact. I mean, Clark Kent's glasses were a solid disguise in comparison.
What I'm probably gonna have to do is make a facing just for this part.
To fix this, I crocheted a facing which would act as the lapel, and secured it to the inside of the neckline with a crocheted red ribbon, resembling the red binding inside the original. And you've probably already realized that the hood was also a weak point. Call it a cop-out if you will, but I just stitched the visible parts because I wasn't prepared to skew the entire balance of the garment with a heavy knit lined hood. So all in all, I think I can safely say the crisis was averted. It might be a good time to add that I wasn't even happy when I finished stitching these hearts in. I was just relieved, like so relieved that I wouldn't have to do another one.
I am missing a heart.
You're probably thinking, you're not installing a zipper and the placket is overlapping. Well, the truth is, I'm still recovering from my previous zipper escapade, and I wasn't willing to forsake all of my work this time round for a suboptimal fastening. Basically, I scoured the interwebs for days looking for just the right zipper, but couldn't find one that even came close. And seeing as those two factors were way beyond my remedying in the given time frame, I decided to go for the next best thing, popper fastenings. If one of the primary objectives of this project was to regress, then I was going to regress the living daylights out of it. To be honest, I tried a hook and eye fastening, but there was just too much stretch and it just didn't work out. In total, I stitched approximately 333 hearts into this sweater. I probably don't need to explain, but I likely won't be making this ever again, for several reasons. For example, time, my sanity, the fact that 333 times 2 is, the hearts look and feel like they've shrunk the knit a little bit, and in hindsight, this was a given. Anyway, this project took a lot out of me unexpectedly, and part of me will forever be lost somewhere in these rows and stitches. But hey, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.